Okay, now I'm very excited to introduce you to the IDs and classes. These are super important concepts in CSS, and they're incredibly helpful, and we'll be using it a lot when we come into JavaScript and more web development stuff. So I recommend you really pay attention during this lecture and practice it as much as you can. You remember how in the last practical I was just talking about how it can be kind of difficult, the fact that in our, for example, our CSS, if you look here, we just have our image styling, and we can only style our image, we can only style all of our images in one way. So here I've said the width should be 100 pixels, and so all of the images we have are 100 pixels. Now wouldn't it be great if we could style them all differently? Or we could just have a group of them to be, for, let's say for example, the social media icons. If only we could have them really small, the same size, so they all look the same and good, and then we could have these ones looking different. Well, this is where IDs and classes come into. So for example, I'm going to start by using classes. So what we can do with classes is we can actually group things together. So for example, I could create a class that says anything that is in this class should have a width and a height of 50 pixels. And any of the images that don't exist in that, well, they won't be styled. So the best way to show you what I mean, in case you're not completely sure, is to show you an example. So here we have all of our images unstyled. Now, instead of creating just an image here, an image styling, that's going to tell all the images what to do, I'm going to create a completely new class. And the way that I do that is by using a dot. If I use a dot, then that's how I define a class. So I'm just going to do dot SM for social media image, and you can call this literally whatever you want. I'll show you once we've done an example. I could change the name and it wouldn't make any difference. The reason why I'm writing SM image is because it makes it more readable, so that when I come back to the CSS in a few days, I won't be looking at random names like, I don't know, class number 3 or something that doesn't really tell me what's going on, and it's much harder to understand what it's styling. So I'm going to put social media icon or image, it doesn't matter. I'm going to use social media icon. So with the dot, I'm basically saying that this is a class. Okay, so even if you're not understanding completely what's going on right now, all I recommend you do is just associate the dot with a class. So instead of us saying I want to style all of the links, or I want to style all of the forms, I'm saying I want to style any element that has the class SM icon. Okay, and so for this I'm just going to give it a width of, let's say, 40px, and let's see how that goes. So I've created this class, but I haven't actually specified any elements that should belong to this class. So I'm going to go to my images here. So this is the HTML where I've created this unordered list. Whoops, clicked on that by mistake. And so yeah, so this is my unordered list of the 3 images. So what I'm going to do is within the image tag, before source, you can do it afterwards if you want, but usually it's best to put this first. I'm going to put class equals, and then the name of the class, SM icon. So I'm not putting dot SM icon, it's just SM icon. So class equals, then in quotations, SM icon. So I'm going to save that, and when I refresh, you can see that it's just this one has changed so far. Why have the other ones not changed? Well, I haven't yet put them in the same class. So we can see that it's not styling all of the images, it's just doing the ones that belong to the SM icon class. And so far I've only said for that one to have the class of SM icon. If I were to add this now, in here for the Twitter icon, and just to make a note, this is why you call your files things like twitter.jpg, linkedin.jpg, because then it's really obvious on what it's referring to, and the same thing with classes. So I'm going to save this now that we have our Twitter icon belonging to the same class. As you can see, yay! So it's got the same width as the Facebook icon. Now, let's do the same thing again. That's just for the LinkedIn. Perfect. So now you can see that these images are belonging to the class that we created called SMIcon. All the other images are the same height or same width, but these ones, they're going according to what we've put in our CSS. So if you haven't already, I highly recommend you pause the video here and you have a go yourself. So just to recap, what we've done is we've created a class by using the dot and then a class name. We can call this whatever we want. And I'm just going to change the name now just to illustrate that you can call it anything. I'm going to call it .blah. And then, by the way, to select multiple things, I'm just holding down Control while I select those things. And I can change them all at the same time, which is quite nice. I change these all to have the class of blah, and you'll see nothing's going to change. If they were to remain as SMIcon, of course, they would change because there is no class called SMIcon anymore. It's just blah. So let's change that back to SMIcon. So have a go at that now. Create your own class using the dot and then a name, and then go into your HTML and add the class into the tag. So pause the video now and give that a try. So I hope that went well. Now we're going to try doing the same thing, but we're actually going to create a class that can go between different elements as well. So it's not just that you can only use a class to style things within, the images, for example. We could style anything. So what I'm going to use for this is I'm going to create another class. I'm going to call this dot background color. Again, I want to emphasize that I could call this anything that I want. It doesn't need to be called background color. It's just, it makes it much more readable and I'll understand what this one's about. So I'm going to style this so that anything belonging to this class is going to have a background color of red. So it's really going to stand out. And now let's go for the home page. Let's go into home. So what I want to show you now is that I can style different elements. I can add them to this class so that they're styled. So let's just start with a H1. So if you remember, within the tag, I'm going to put class equals, and then background. It's being very helpful here and suggesting it. Background color. So you'll see that the H1, it now has a red background. Now let's say I want the table to also have a red background. I'm going to go in here into the table and say class equals background color. We're going to save it, refresh, and there we go. We have another background color. So maybe now you're just starting to see how useful this could be. It's a very powerful tool within CSS, and if you're still not understanding it, I couldn't recommend enough giving this another go, getting practical with it until you're feeling pretty confident. So just to go over the steps, you put a dot to define that it's going to be a class, give it a name whatever you want, use the standard syntax for styling, and then you can go into any element and go into the tag and put class equals and then the name of that tag. So this is classes. Now I want to talk about IDs. So this is kind of like the sibling of class. We usually create a class when we know we want to style a number of different elements in that same way. So for example here, I wanted to style both the header and the table. So I created a class that could style lots of different things. Now an ID you use for styling just one single thing. So, for example, if you had loads of images like this, and they all, they're all being styled fine, but you just wanted to style one image, so you obviously wouldn't want to go in and style the image element. That wouldn't make sense. You could use a class, but it's best practice to use an ID, And when we come to using JavaScript, we'll be working with IDs quite a lot. So it's good to get some practice in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an ID, and instead of using a dot, what I use is hash. So this I'm going to do for this image here. So that's for our tutorial page. So I'm going to call the ID tutorial image. So it's exactly the same as creating classes, except we just use the hash, and then we won't use class, but ID when we come to assigning our elements the ID. I'll show you what I mean. So for this, let's create a border. 4px, solid, green. So we go into this now, and I just want to style this tutorial page one here, which could be, it's not, there we go, JPEG, right in here. So after image, I'm going to put, instead of class equals, like we did before, I'm going to use ID equals, and then I believe I called it tutorial, there we go, image, perfect. Great. And then this should just style only this image. So if we look here, great. It's only styled this image here. So that's everything to do with class and ID. It's a super important concept to get your head around. So definitely just practice away, have some fun with it. Just to recap, you create your class in your CSS file using a dot, and then whatever name you want to create. And for classes, that's when you want to style a number of different elements the same way. If you want to style just one element, it's best practice to create an ID, and you do that using the hash. When it comes to actually using it in your HTML, all you have to do is go in and within your tag, you put ID equals and then the name of the ID, or class equals and the name of the class. So like I've said before, definitely give this a go, practice it yourself, and once you're feeling slightly confident with it, I'll see you in the next lecture.